Hello everyone. We are going to start our fifth paper, Principles of Criticism, with a brief introduction of what criticism is, what are its fundamentals, and how we should approach a work of art, and what do we exactly mean by true critic or true criticism. Let's have a quick look at the syllabus. In Unit 1, we have Bharat's Natya Shastra and Kuntak, who belong to the Indian school of criticism. In Unit 2, we have Aristotle who represents Greek school of criticism, and Brecht, who represents German. Unit 3, we have T.S. Eliot and Kenneth Brooks, belonging to 20th century or modern criticism. Unit 4, we have Derrida and Foucault, belonging to post-structuralist criticism. And Unit 5, we have Showalter, David Lloyd and Homi Bhabha, belonging to feminist and post-colonial schools of criticism. Now this was just an overview, because when we look at the syllabus, we see that the journey of criticism, it starts with Bharat, Indian aesthetic school of criticism, then we move on to Aristotle, then we end up towards Homi Bhabha, that is post-colonial. So before peeping into or studying these authors and texts, we must have a clarity about what do we mean by or understand by criticism, and what exactly is the journey of criticism from criticism to literary theory, how it has moved. So we look at fundamentals first. Let's start with the definition of criticism. The word criticism, it has been derived from the Greek word kritikos, that signifies to be able to discern or judge. Now when we look at the dictionary definition of criticism, it is defined as an act of passing judgment upon the qualities of anything. Now from this definition has developed some usage of the word criticism, and then we reach to the conclusion that it is considered to be an art of estimating the qualities and the character of a literary or artistic work. Now the second fundamental point that we must keep in mind is that criticism is both a science and art. It is both analytical and creative. As a science, it studies literature analytically, that is why it is called science. It classifies it according to its modes and methods, then deduces certain laws of the behavior of the human mind in all its creative functions, and that is how it becomes a science. Then we can say that when it studies analyzes the behavior of human mind in all its creative functions, it becomes an art and becomes analytical and creative too. But we must keep in mind that critic, he not only acts as an estimator, he not only estimates a work, he acts as a legislator also, because he does not only instruct but he often dictates. When we look at Aristotle and Bharat, these authors, they made a careful study of all the literary documents which were available to them, and they arrived at certain formulations. And these formulations, within the course of time, they came to acquire an authoritative character. Although it was not in their minds when they were doing this, all they meant was that they indicated how a poem or a drama is composed. Later on, it was left for the disciples to affirm that this is how a poem or a drama should be composed. Now what do we deduce out of this is that with the passage of time, certain empirical formulations came to be regarded as scientific generalizations having certain universal validity. So we know that the function of judgment or criticism is to establish the taste within the critic also, and like taking it from the writer and establishing it to the critic. Now sometimes we say that this is not true criticism. true criticism must be looked upon as the appreciation of a well-equipped and trained mind to the task of forming taste. Now, what do we mean by trained mind? By trained mind is meant a mind that has undergone a discipline of varied and wide acquaintances. Because it is very obvious that if we seek to judge or assess any matters that involve taste, our taste also, that is to say, one's own taste has to have acquired a proper tone and quality. Only then we will be able to judge. Because if a critic, he relies too excessively upon the theoretics of criticism, it might give rise to certain faults. It might make the criticism somewhat superficial. The criticism would then be only paying attention to surface values. This means that judgment can be one-sided and incomplete. For example, if we read the Mahabharata in terms of the canons of Western criticism, it leads us nowhere. Why it leads us nowhere? Because it limits us to only externals. We can't go into too much of details because we are approaching the text from Western canon. And another problem that arises is, if criticism of this kind, if we rely too much on theory, it easily generates into fault finding, because then the critic only dictates judgment instead of actually trying to educate. So what do we conclude is, what do we say is that a critic must move beyond or go beyond the spiritual origins. That means he must have to understand what were the spiritual origins of a writer's creative urge, because otherwise he will not be able to do justice to what he is doing. Criticism is said to begin with a scientific analysis and ending in aesthetic appreciation. What do we mean by this is that no criticism is worthy of to be called as criticism unless it exhibits both these aspects. Let's understand it this way. The critic begins the study, he analyzes, classifies, generalizes, and at the initial stage, all the intellectual faculties are at work of the critic. The emotions of the critic are held back. He doesn't interfere. The emotions don't interfere or influence the critic in any way. That is to say, the critic is objective and he is totally disinterested. Now, later on, others follow this kind of method, and we know that when we say that criticism begins with a scientific analysis and ends in aesthetic appreciation, by science we mean scholarship also, by science we mean knowledge also. The example of Aristotle is very obvious and very clear to understand this fact, that Aristotle had a knowledge of medicine. So the knowledge of medicine or the study of medicine, it suggested to him the theory of tragic catharsis. The study or the knowledge of biology suggested him the conception of organic nature. When he talks of organism or organic nature, he is actually referring it to some biological facts, so on and so forth. Now, the underlying significance of criticism is always based on a comprehensive study and knowledge. Only then it can have a liberalizing effect. One more thing a critic must have to keep in mind is that essential qualities of any age, they enter into the texture, they enter into the condition, form, color, or the proper understanding of the age is very essential for a critic. Because critic is never bound by his age and traditions, it is said, then it becomes a closed mind. But on the contrary, he cannot detach himself completely from the texture and condition of his age. Because as we say, that criticism must take into account the social condition which influence the literary art in diverse ways. So all those traditions, because literature develops new forms and styles with the changing conditions of social life. if a critic is too much bound to tradition, he will be disabled from recognizing new modes of expression, because sometimes those new modes can also represent a more subtle and more obtruse effort at evaluation. So a learned critic would do a blunder if he is not learning by liberalism, if he is not learning by sensitivities. Therefore, we say that since age is not a self-enclosed entity, so an age, if it is not a self-enclosed entity and it is rather a moment and part of that larger movement, and a movement is always understood with reference to the moment. There are two terms, moment and movement. Moment is always, it happens as a movement, and movement is always understood with reference to the movement. Let's clarify this with the help of an example. During the Elizabethan times, the Elizabethans hated the Jews and they despised all the Jews for their shortcomings, etc. But the Elizabethans, on the contrary, had also felt that there is a need for broadened human outlook, which is very well depicted in Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice in the character of Shylock, because Shylock was a Jew. Shylock the Jew, he constantly emerges from the ghetto into which Christian charity had relegated to him the universal human note. Now, where the mere Jew is merged in the man within inverted commas, because he belongs to the larger category of mankind. This kind of interpretation of Shylock's character will gain penetration only if the critic enters into the forces which are released by the Renaissance, because until unless the critic is not understanding what Renaissance is, he will not be able to do justice to the criticism or the analysis of character. In such cases, what does the poet does is, he anticipates the coming years, and sometimes it's said that the poet becomes a prophet. The critic also has to become a prophet, because he has to acquire this inward looking vision. That is to say that unless the critic emancipates himself from the limitations of the age, he will not have the power to enter into the spirit or the significance of any literary work, and which will make his judgment incomplete. Now, these were some of the basics or the fundamentals of criticism. Before moving on to the text, that is before reading Aristotle, we will quickly look at, in our next session, we will quickly look at some of the classical foundations of criticism, because it's essential to note down what happened as far as Greek criticism is concerned, Romans, medieval, romantics, modern criticism, 20th century, etc. So in our next session, we will begin with the classical foundation of criticism and then forward move on to text.